All right, well, I hope everybody had a good weekend and is well rested and ready for some good conversation. We'll start off with some kind of check-in and get things going. And then I'll kind of give you a little bit of background knowledge that ties into Hydrolearn 101 and tell you how we use that to design these 2 weeks to give you, I know there's some questions about exactly how is this hackathon laid out and kind of what the expectations are. So in kind of building off the conversation we were just engaging with, what was something that stood out to you from Hydrolearn 101? It could be something new, something incongruous, something confusing, something that was kind of neat, a tool you didn't know about. Kind of anything could fit into this. So I'm going to put you in your in breakout rooms. Hopefully, I'll put you in the right room with your partner. If you don't see your partner in there, go ahead and let me know. So yeah, I just want you to discuss this. What was something that stood out to you from Hydrolearn 101?
Hey guys. Hey, so just to answer Zita, your question real quick about the role of the tech support, I've got a couple students I've contributed to this activity, Olivia and Ren. They can't build your course for you, but they can definitely just provide a little bit of input and guidance on some of that technical stuff. They're sort of like a live PDF, I suppose. If you need help, you can ask them. I do have them. Because they're building their own courses, and part of the whole point of this workshop and this fellowship was to build the material and then to learn how to build it and build it inside Hydrolearn. So I think you'll find, once you get past a couple of real simple components, plus you're on a team. So as a team, you might have somebody on your team who's better at writing those HTML paragraph tags than somebody else. So you could divide up work there. I do like the idea, by the way, of building, sort of organizing material in I wouldn't do Word, I would use a shared Google document so you can all see it together and then go from there into the Hydrolearn. It's kind of nice to structure it in a document first, like a Google document. At least that's what we've done here.
Yeah, I love that suggestion, Dan. Actually, as we go through the workshop this week, we will share with you Google Doc templates that will help set you up for that so that you can work on pieces of it with your partners.
Thank you, helpful.
And Dan, I did not catch the question, but just a quick clarification. Every fellow or every participant has a dedicated technical guide, right? So besides the 2 individuals that Dan mentioned, we actually have a total of 4, I believe. Every person should have already information on who is their technical guide. That's
so just to,
right.
Yeah, just to bring it full circle, the question was, would it be okay for the fellows just to write their material in a Word document and then have the technical support people build the Hydrolearn modules?
And I think you answered that, Dan, correctly. I was just adding to the
Well, there are
every fellow has a dedicated. If you don't know who your technical guide is, please email Melissa or I. There's a technical guide. There is also a content guide, and there's also an education guide, right, Melissa? Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
All right. So hopefully there were some good things that stood out to you, and if there's anything that was confusing, we will hopefully address that in the next few weeks, or the next 2 weeks. I wanted to let you know a little bit about our agenda for today. Today and tomorrow, we're going to have 3 sessions, but after that, we'll go down to the 2 sessions, just the first one of the day and the end of the day. So today, our first session will be about an hour and a half. Our focus will be on writing learning objectives and outlining your module and talking about why that's an important place to start. You also have time to get started working on that. Then we'll ask that you do create learning objectives and begin to outline your module before session 2 starts, so you'll have time to work in partners. And we'll set this up, I'll set you up in Zoom rooms so you and your partner can stay in this Zoom and work together in your Zoom rooms, or if you want to create your own Zoom, or you want to work in Microsoft Teams, or you want to just divide up the work and work in Google Docs, you can kind of be flexible in how you do that. but the co-PIs and technical guides will all stay on the Zoom call. So if you have difficulty during that partner work time, you can always pop back into the Zoom to ask for help or ask for advice or questions. Then Jenny will lead session 2, and we'll talk about kind of the functionality of Hydrolearn and how to begin taking the module outline you created this morning and putting it into Hydrolearn. And then at the end of the day, we'll meet in our content groups. That means with your content guide, either Ahmad, Dave, Dan, or Belize. So that bigger group of partners that you met with on the first day, to share and give feedback on your learning objectives and module outlines so that you can start to take that feedback into consideration. One thing that's really important to us with Hydrolearn is that we create modules that are useful to you in your courses, but also are useful to other faculty members at other institutions. So this process of continuous review and feedback from other content experts is kind of to give you that perspective of how could this be used by other people, or how are other people perceiving or seeing the module? So our goals for today are to write learning objectives for your modules, to create a clear outline, to begin to create your module in Hydrolearn, to create the module itself, and to begin to build the outline, and then to revise your outline and learning objectives based on feedback. So by the end of the day today, we hope that you have your learning objectives and your outline. And I want to state that this is, you don't often have this much time to devote to creating course material. And so course material often is, I'm going to pull these things and do it. Whereas this is a process that's meant to be different. So just because we write learning objectives today, you may end up revising those slightly as the week goes on, as you maybe choose different tasks or change your focus or get different feedback. So I want to kind of put up front that this is meant to be an iterative process, and that it's not, we created the learning objectives, check, no change needs to happen. In fact, some of the modules we've shown you, like Beau Bassin and Dry Canyon, those learning objectives have been revised and refined many, many times over. All right, so I know you know your topics. You were brainstorming last week, and most of you were able to create a Brainstorming Topics Google Doc inside your team folder. For right now, I want you to brainstorm with your partners, what is the point of your module? What do you hope students walk away with by the end of completing this module? So that's a little different than thinking about the topic, but what is the point of it? So we're going to spend about 10 minutes brainstorming that with your partners in a Google Doc in your shared folder. Jenny, would you put a link to the fellows folder in the, oh, I think chat's disabled, right? Chat is now enabled. Jenny, would you put a link to the fellows folder in the chat box? Are there any questions about what our goal is with this activity? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put you in your breakout rooms. All right, so hopefully everyone had the opportunity to have a good conversation. I realized I probably should have told you up front, the way these breakout rooms are going to go is I'll end up pulling you back together, and it will almost always feel a little frustrating because you'll almost always have been in the middle of something good. So I apologize for that, but I want to keep the discussion moving and then also add in new tidbits to keep pushing the conversation forward. You'll have lots of time to work with your partner today and over the course of the next 2 weeks. So hopefully you'll be able to continue that conversation. I hope everyone was able to think about this kind of 10,000-foot question of what's the point of the module. And the reason we're starting there is because we're gonna,
Melissa, just one thing, the slides that you're showing are different than the slides that are in the fellows folder.
There were a few slides that I removed in the deck that I put in the fellows folder. Are they vastly different or just slightly different?
Well, I was just not finding the one that you asked for. What's the point of the module? The number 7.
Well, that slide should have been in there. I just copied them over this morning. So if you're in the hackathon day 1.
Yeah.
Yep, I guess I pulled that slide out. I apologize. I only pulled out a couple slides, so the rest should be the same. So we're going to talk about constructive alignment. You've learned about constructive alignment in Hydrolearn 101, but it is a difficult thing to always keep at the forefront. So constructive alignment is the idea that your learning objectives, your goals for what your students will learn, should match what you assess students on, should match what you instruct them on, that there should be this alignment between these 3 things. That if I have something as my learning objective that I never taught, I shouldn't assess it. At the same time, if I have something I taught and I assessed, that should be captured in my learning objectives. So these 3 things should always be in alignment. And we're going to use this as kind of the framework for revisiting and thinking about all the things that we do. And I will say that constructive alignment is often very hard to get perfect, but so our objective here is to get things pretty tightly aligned and to be open to continuous revision. In thinking about, one way to think about constructive alignment and to use that to plan is to plan with what's called backward design. When you plan with backward design, you start by identifying the desired results, which is the learning objectives. And then you determine acceptable evidence, which is coming up with the assessments. And then you plan the learning experiences and instruction, which we refer to as the instructional content of the modules. So essentially, it's called backward design because you start with your learning objectives. The next thing you plan is your assessment, which usually we come up with at the end, right? Like maybe during a course, you're making this 2 weeks before the semester ends. But ideally, if you make the assessment at the beginning, then you can ensure that your content that you're teaching aligns with the assessment. So this is a very common way of planning. Both in education in general, and also it's becoming more popular in engineering education. So in thinking about this idea of constructive alignment and backwards design, those are the 2 frameworks we've used to plan out the 2 weeks of our hackathon, or really 9 days because we end on July 2nd. So I wanted to give you this kind of overview so you could see the topics and where we're going and what we're talking about and kind of the big ideas. Today, like I said, we'll be focusing on learning objectives in the module outline. Each day we'll have some kind of theory part, some time to work with your partners, and some time to build in Hydrolearn with specific instruction on take this step, take that step to build in Hydrolearn. Tomorrow we'll talk about authentic tasks and learning activities. Again, on Wednesday, we'll talk about learning activities and rubrics. And on Thursday, we'll talk about learning activities and constructive alignment checking. And so we hope that by Thursday, you've got at least one really solid, well-written, totally put together learning activity that could be your culminating activity. And maybe during this time, you've come up with additional activities you would put in your module and that you've begun to build these in your module. On Friday, we have a half day, and we'll talk about designing instructional content. And then again, next week, we'll continue to talk about instructional content with the different tools you can use and embed in Hydrolearn, and always coming back to the idea of constructive alignment. Our goal is that by the end of next week, if you are able to use the partner work time every day and things are productive and moving along, that you should have a really strong put together draft of your module by the end of next week. Now I know that some people have other meetings or things that they need to take care of in the next 2 weeks that will impede some of your partner work time. And so what we've discussed as the final due date for your modules is July 31st. So if you're able to use all your partner work time and you feel like you have it done by July 2nd, that's great. But if you need additional time, we would like final modules by July 31st. That gives us time to review and give feedback to each of you so that you could make revisions and be ready to roll them out at the beginning of the semester. And it also allows us to process your stipends. All right, so let's come back to the idea of backward design. We're going to start off with number 1, identifying desired results, which means that we're going to define learning objectives. So a learning objective has a few parts to it. It has 4 parts to it in the way we're going to talk about it, with that middle part being the generic language the student will be able to. 2 of these parts are optional. The condition and degree are optional, and the action and task are non-negotiable. Every learning objective must have an action or task. So we're going to kind of follow these 2. These are our 2 example learning objectives. I'll give you a second to read those 2 learning objectives to yourself. So the condition of a learning objective tells under which conditions the students will be able to perform the behavior. So some examples might be given a topographic data set, or given a diagram of the water cycle, or using a data set from NOAA. So this is a condition under which you would expect them to perform this learning objective. That means I don't expect them to perform this learning objective under other conditions, but only given this specific condition. So if we go back to our examples, our example learning objectives, the conditions then are given a topographic data set or given a water supply and demand data set. So those are the specific conditions under which students would be expected to complete or achieve these learning objectives. So that means is for this first learning objective, the student will be able to implement the key steps in watershed delineation. I'm not expecting them to do that without being given a topographic data set, if that makes sense. So not all learning objectives will have conditions, only if there's a specific condition under which you would expect this to be done. So then comes the kind of generic, the student will be able to. In education, we call it SWBAT, S-W-B-A-T, student will be able to. In fact, when I write learning objectives, I usually just write SWBAT in the middle. Although for you, I will make sure to write them out clearly. And then, I went in the wrong direction, sorry. And then we follow that with the action. So the action is the verb that refers to the actions associated with the learning objectives and is tied to a level of Bloom's taxonomy. It describes what students are expected to do or acquire. So we learned about Bloom's taxonomy in Hydrolearn 101. There are many, many versions of this triangle that include slightly different verbs, but these 6 levels are the current levels as they're currently agreed upon. And so here are some examples of action verbs that you might use in your learning objectives. So I will say that some of these are a little bit subjective. So for instance, execute is at the level of apply, but you can execute at a really basic remember or understand level. So for instance, if I want to, if I'm planning to execute an operation, or if I'm asking students to execute a program and I'm giving them a set of steps to follow and asking them to execute it, and they're just having a copy of those steps, they're not actually applying it. They're just remembering what I asked them to do the first time. So some of these verbs are not necessarily lockstep into this level of thinking, right? Another one that's a common debate in math is the word evaluate. is way up here on Bloom's taxonomy, and if I'm asking a student to evaluate whether this detention basin will hold sufficient water for its purpose, that is an evaluate question. But if I'm asking students to evaluate f of x at x equals 3, then that's not a high level of Bloom's taxonomy. So one thing to think about is these action words, these verbs, give us an anchor to Bloom's taxonomy, but what we really need to think about is what kind of thinking are we asking students to do? So that's the action, and these two examples, we have implement and assess. And then one thing that I like about the learning objectives wizard in Hydrolearn, which I will say that Doug Williams designed that, is that it ties the Bloom's taxonomy levels to your learning objectives. So if you use the learning objectives wizard, it will add the Bloom's taxonomy level here. So the next part of a learning objective is the task. That's what students are doing, right? So the verb here tells us how they're doing it, but then the task is what they're doing. So in these examples, we have the key steps in watershed delineation, or assess the potential value of using non-traditional water resources to reduce water stresses. So the task is that part. And as I said, the action and task are the two non-negotiables. So we could leave out, given a topographic data set and including pit filling this end part, and just have the learning objective. The student will be able to implement the key steps in watershed delineation. That could be, that would be an acceptable learning objective. So here are some examples of tasks, or action and task, because we put them together, that we have in some of our Hydrolearn modules. And the last part is the degree, which it describes the level of performance. So maybe I don't expect students to do this perfectly. A lot of times if I'm in like a 101 course and then there's a 102 that's going to build on it, I might expect students to do this most of the time, or with a somewhat degree of accuracy, but I might not expect them to do it perfectly all the time or at the highest level. And so degree allows me to kind of put that contingency on there. Another way to think about it is kind of in certain, adding more specifics to the learning objective. So here in this first one, the degree talks about what types of things the students need to take into consideration. And again, that's kind of how we thought about it here in this second example. And here are some more examples of degrees that we've used in Hydrolearn. So some important do's and don'ts of writing learning objectives is that we want to use verbs at a variety of Bloom's taxonomy. If you have a freshman level or a very intro level course, you might have more verbs at the lower levels, but you still want to push students at least a little bit into the upper levels of Bloom's taxonomy. If you have an advanced course, or not just for hydrology, right, but whatever your course content is. If you have an advanced course, like a senior design course, all your learning objectives might be at the top level. But you might still have a few at the lower level. Maybe they need to learn how to use PC Swim in order to do some of the design features that you're asking them to. So you do want verbs at a variety of Bloom's taxonomy, but that doesn't mean that they have to be evenly distributed. We want to use specific verbs, that action word that should be specific, so that they can be observed or measured. A real common mistake that instructors make is to use the word understand. So we can't measure if a student understands something, because that is all happening inside their head. So we want to use verbs like identify, define, discuss, things that we can see, ask students to do, and then see how well they did those things. And then another thing to make sure you're thinking about is make sure the task that you're describing is specific. If it's too general, then then the learning objective really could mean a variety of different things. We want to make sure that it's specific. So as we go through, we'll be talking about some things that we're looking for with regard to these different components. So this is kind of our checklist as we look for and review modules. One would be that learning objectives are clear and represent different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. They use measurable verbs. They're listed in the summary and learning objectives unit at the start of a module. We'll talk more about that with Jenny, actually with Dan in a little bit, and that they're listed in a summary and learning objectives unit at the start of each section. So we want those learning objectives really present for our students. So what I'm going to ask you to do now, I'm going to put you back into your partner groups. And I'd like you to consider what you wrote for what is the point of your module, and try to break that into discrete things or discrete ideas that you would ask your students to know or be able to do, to write those as learning objectives. And keep that in your brainstorming document. We also put a learning objectives document in our shared folder. So if you're in the shared fellows folder, there's this learning objectives document that we put here, which includes the ideas we just went over from the slides. It also includes kind of descriptions of the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy and some example verbs that go with those. So this could be helpful as you work with your partner to come up with your learning objectives. All right, any questions before we go into our breakout rooms?
Yes, one quick question. I think you kind of mentioned this, but should we, I guess we shouldn't try to aim at, any particular distribution of that every objective that we should get to all of the different categories, but I guess, so it really depends more on the class content as to how many objectives we have and how many of each taxonomy level we cover, correct?
That's a great question, Mauricio. So we find that a lot of our modules have 4 to 6 learning objectives. You could have maybe 3 or maybe more. So there is certainly lots of flexibility there. And also with the levels of Bloom's taxonomy, so we kind of divide them right in the middle here between apply and analyze, considering these 3 to be lower cognitive demand and then these 3 to be higher.
Mm-hmm.
I would hope to see at least 1 higher and at least 1 lower, and the distribution of the rest is really about what makes sense for your course.
Awesome, thank you.
Great. Any other questions?
Could you give us a sort of indication of how much time we expect to have in the breakout rooms?
Great question. So we're probably going to spend another 10 minutes in the breakout rooms, and then we're going to come back together to talk about the module outline, and then you'll have 2.5 hours to keep working on your learning objectives and your module outline. All right, so we've had so many good conversations. Oh, we're still jumping back in. We've had lots of good conversations, and I know that you are probably itching to work more with your partners. Dan is going to present to us now about the kind of outline that we follow in the modules of Hydrolearn. And then when we break in about 20 minutes, you'll have time to work with your partners more on your learning objectives and your module outline. So if you had any final thoughts, like, oh, don't forget to do this when I meet with my partner again, feel free to jot that down before, I don't know if your brain's like mine and things fly out of it. And Dan, whenever you are ready, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, and I think I'm going to start right here on slide 33. Does that sound good to you? Is that where we're at? I think that's where we're at.
Yep, that's where we're at.
All right. Is it better like this, or do I need to go into present mode? Let's see. If I'm in present mode, does it still share?
Yes, that looks good.
Okay, great. Yeah, so just in terms of organizing your section or your module, just, well, just want you to think in terms of a module, like we talked about last week, as being a self-contained knowledge and learning and education that doesn't necessarily, that is self-contained in that, as we talked about in one of our breakouts earlier, it may reach out to other websites or give you links to other information, but it's self-contained, and then it doesn't require other modules or certain textbooks or resources at your university in order for you to be able to complete it. Inside that module, we want you to break it down into sections and subsections, and the sort of, well, I won't say approved, but our suggested or recommended organization is you start with an introduction section. And this overview introduction section introduces the entire module, and it gives the students really the big picture. And that should be right away, right out of the box, so that when they read that introduction, they know what this whole module is about. Now, in most cases, the students that are doing your module are probably being required to do the module because it's being offered as part of a course, and the professor is saying, go on Hydrolearn and complete this module for the next 2 weeks. Okay, so they're being required to. So the introduction, you could say, well, does it really matter? It's not like you're trying to capture their interest like at the beginning of a good novel. But on the other hand, for good, to make this more engaging educationally, write a nice, clean, interesting, engaging introduction. Also keeping in mind that we want other professors to find your module and try to use it. So they will probably also read the introduction. Just like when you read an abstract to a research article before agreeing to review the article, sometimes you read the abstract and it tells you, well, for me, it's every time, that's the thing that tells me whether or not I'm interested. So that introduction gives the big picture. And then after the introduction section, you're going to have, within the introduction section, you're going to have a module overview that contains the brief summary and the overall learning objectives. And this is your introduction. So this is the exciting intro text in here, the brief summary. Just so you get the language correct, we have the module is the big thing, and then the section, subsection, and then units are the actual little bits of text or information that you're sharing with the student or participant. Okay, so please create this introduction section exactly like this for your very first section. Introduction, overview, summary, and learning objectives. If you want to refer back to this PowerPoint, obviously you can. Now, once you get into an actual content section, like here's an example one for precipitation that Melissa put together. I guess you did this one, Melissa, but it's really a nice example. Once you get into this content section, each content section should also have an introduction subsection that introduces this content, this, like in this case, precipitation, and where appropriate, a learning objective, a summary and a learning objective for this section. Now I can imagine a case where you come up with a section that really just repeats the learning objectives from above, or that repeats a learning objective that was already used in a previous section. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with just copying and pasting that learning objective again into the section where it matters. Optimally though, each section, the thing that makes it a section is that it's a package of knowledge that has something new you want the students to learn, or something that you want them to get out of it. Therefore, it sort of needs its own learning objective. It is probably one of the learning objectives from the introduction. So we got a topic. Here our topic is precipitation. And there's your first subsection, summary and learning objective. The nice thing about doing this on every one is then when any student goes to anywhere in Hydrolearn, they know that if I just go to a section, I can quickly find out what is the purpose of this section, because they will all have this introduction module. And now here we have a couple of subsections of actual content. So it's all related in this case to precipitation, but we've got something on measurement, something on statistics. Don't worry about that kind of content level stuff from my example, because you could argue, well, for me, you know, precipitation measurement really is its own learning objective, therefore it deserves its own section. Or for me, statistics is its own learning objective, so it deserves its own section. Don't worry about that for the moment. Just imagine these as parts of the content of the section, the technical content. And let's look at subsection 3 to give you the idea of how, like the kinds of stuff that you could put into a subsection. Notice that there's another summary. You're probably going to get sick of writing summaries everywhere, but it's just a nice way to make sure that you're not just piling information on people without explaining why. So a summary to your subsection, just a brief one. This could be a paragraph. This could be 3 sentences. And then you get into the actual units, the learning units. And as you see in the notes here on the side, each of these units are actually just presenting material. And at the end of the material, bang, check your understanding. What is check your understanding? This is something you've got to put in there yourself. I mean, we're giving you basically a blank canvas, but we're asking you to model it like this. Check your understanding, that's going to be like a quiz that you build that makes sure they kind of understand the content here, the technical content or the concepts. And then after the quiz to check their understanding, hit them with their learning activity. And the learning activity, in my case, in some of the labs I'm building or the modules I'm building, the learning activity is actually one of the bigger pieces. And we've even broken the learning activity out into a separate subsection in some cases because it's so big. But the learning activity is kind of the hands-on thing. The learning activity might be, now go and do. We've given you the concepts, we've checked your understanding, now we want you to go and do something with that. And that's, if you go back to the Bloom's taxonomy, that's like the apply, taking the knowledge that they figured, they've learned, and now we're going to apply it to a new area or to solve an actual problem. Before I go off the slide, any questions or feedback on this slide here? Introduction section, content section. A content section has subsections, the first of which is another little brief intro. Then each subsection's got material, check your understanding, and then learn something, do a hands-on activity. So you could, if we check out this one on Hydrolearn, let's see if you can still see my screen. This is the culvert design using HECRAS module. Let's take a look at how it's organized, assuming I can get logged in. All right, actually, I don't think I even need to log in to see the organization. Right, okay. So let's take a look. See this? Here we have the overall introduction with the module overview and the summary. The summary is, I'm so server today, like just a little paragraph. This one's nice because it includes pictures. Think about your students and have a little pity and mercy on them, and please include pictures and graphics and things because, it helps them learn and it also makes it more interesting to look at. Summary and then the overall learning objectives. Okay, now we're getting into the subsections called section 1, 2, so each one of these is a section. The intro is a section, but notice it's been numbered such section 1 of content, section 2 of content, section 3 of content. And each one of these sections has an intro, a little bit of software information, some concepts, and then bada bang, bada boom, check your understanding. This is the quiz. So it's a small thing, but it's actually a huge thing to try to keep these. This one doesn't have the check your understanding, but try to keep these consistent. And then a little recap at the end. That's pretty nice. Each section is clearly labeled and numbered. You could tell what the units include, whether it's a check your understanding, a learning activity, or just concepts and content. If we go look at the learning objectives, yeah, our goal is later today to have you, maybe we already, I guess we haven't done it, but have you build this learning objective directly in Hydrolearn. Okay, so here it is. This is overall learning objectives for each section. And each subsection activity has some learning objectives. And here they're written out. Let's go take just one more quick look at it. At the HECRAS, culvert design using HECRAS. At the introduction, learning objectives. There it is, overall learning objectives. In this module, you'll develop the skills necessary to construct a hydrologic model and culvert design, online culvert. So this doesn't exactly use the formula that Melissa presented. I like Melissa's formula where it's like, given such and so, you and then you'll be able, the student will either one of those Bloom's taxonomy words, apply, design, whatever it was, remember. It doesn't exactly use that, but it shows that there's some flexibility here. And I think if you read this carefully, you'll see that it does capture the main key components. Let's see, here are the following breakdown of learning objectives associated with this module. In section 1, HECRAS culvert design for an idealized case. This is the title of the section. And then here's the subsection and activity that they're gonna do. Notice this model is exactly after their module. And then here are the learning objectives. We want them to input a general culvert structure into HECRAS. I love how specific that is. Set up a steady state plan and conduct a pre-post investigation. Perform culvert design. So feel free to use these as examples. This is one, there are a bunch of modules you'll find on Hydrolearn. This is one that we picked out that it's pretty good and it's a nice example. So feel free to use it. And so we've got this template, a module outline template over in the Fellows folder. And hopefully everybody knows how to make a copy of a document in Google Docs, right click and duplicate or however you want to do it. Put it in your team folder. And then what we'd like you to do in that document is just brainstorm, hands-on, quickly, seat of the pants, doesn't have to be perfect. The sections, subsections, and units you might include in your module. Intro section, subsections, label and number your sections. And then go ahead and add a learning objective section. So this is the goal, and I think we're giving you a little bit more time to do this today. Not one of these. This is not a 10-minute breakout. This is a hour and a half, I think, right? Yeah, an hour and a half breakout to knock this out. Promise you, if you'll just focus on this for the next hour and a half and fill in that outline, that you've really nailed kind of a huge part of the work on thinking through Hydrolearn and this kind of module development. Just this next hour and a half will be some of the most valuable time you'll use to outline this thing. Any
Thanks, Dan, for
questions or additions from my fellow instructors?
I appreciate your discussion there, Dan, and kind of thorough going over the format. We want the flexibility, we want the modules to be flexible, but also when you have so many modules created in one platform, there's some usefulness to having a similar format to how things are kind of rolled out. So that's where some of those ideas come from. Also, you'll notice in that module outline template, that table actually can be copied later right into your summary and learning objectives unit in Hydrolearn. So we're trying to set you up for that. So our goal during this work time, we have two goals for you. One is to create your module outline, and then the other is to create the learning objectives. And once you've done that, if you would email your content and education guides so that they can kind of look that over and give you feedback. We're going to keep this work time kind of flexible, so I'll put you in your partner breakout rooms and you are free to use those, but if you, as I said earlier, would rather meet in a different way with your partner, or if you have kind of other things and you want to work on this at a later time, you can negotiate that with your partner. Just, I would ask that you let your myself and your or your education and your content guides know that you have other things and you'll be getting to this task later. So yeah, those are our 2 goals, the learning objectives and the module outline. We'll come back together at 2 p.m. East Coast time, and however that translates into your time zone, to learn how to start building these modules and putting these module outlines and learning objectives into Hydrolearn itself. Any questions before I put you in your breakout rooms?
Melissa, who do we have to email this to? Is it to you or?
So your content and education guides, that is your assigned point of contact. And I am not everyone's education guide. So let me put that link. It's in your fellows folder, but I will put the link here as well. Oops, I just sent that to one person. I apologize. Any other questions? That was a good one, Hillary. Okay, so the co-PIs and technical guides will also stay in this Zoom room. So if you decide to break out and go meet in some other way, but then you have a question, this Zoom link will be active, so you can just come back into this room to find us. If you need anything, yeah, just reach out. We look forward to seeing you again in an hour and a half. Looks like we had a lot of thumbs up there. So Jenny is going to talk to you all now about creating your modules in Hydrolearn and going forward with that. So I'm going to turn it over to her. But I wanted to kind of let you know that we thought about lots of different ways to structure this, and we thought that the best way might be for her to go through the steps with you, go through all of them at once. And then what we'll do is put you back in your partner groups when she's done, and you can do them with your partner. But if you and your partner want a technical guide, your technical guide, Jenny, Ren, Laura, or Olivia, to help you more individually if you feel stuck or the technical aspects, you know, the steps are confusing or you get stuck on those, then you can always come back to the main room or call me and I'll send a technical guide to help you in your partner rooms. So in that way, Jenny's going to present kind of a lot of steps at once, but you'll have help immediately afterwards in getting this launched and getting your modules started. All right, Jenny, go for it.
Thanks. And another good point to make is that you've all have done this before when you completed the end of section 1 in Hydrolearn 101. We had you create your own empty shell course and then export the practice module and then import it into that shell. We're doing something very simple, similar today, except that it's with a template module that we have created for you. So here we have tasks that we are going to complete today as part of this session. And like Melissa said, I will go over the steps. I'm available for any questions you may have. And then we're going to put you in your partner groups or trios so where you can work on this as a team. So the first thing that we're going to do in transferring your thoughts from paper into a module, the first thing we're going to have to do is create a shell module. All this means is that it's an empty space where you can import this template module into. And then I'm going to guide you through the steps of exporting the module and then importing it into your shell. And then the next step is to hide your module while it's under development. You'll add your team members. So by team members, I mean all of your partners, and as well as your education guide, your content guide, and your technical advisor. And then after that, you will be creating your module outline and creating the overall learning objectives table in your module. So the first step is to create that empty module to import something into. So only one team member needs to complete this step. And you're all familiar with this now, you're pros, right? So first you create a new course. You're going to have to provide some information. So you're going to, as a team, need to decide on what your module name will be if you haven't decided already, as well as the organization, course number, and course run. You'll see that some of these things can be changed later in the advanced settings. You can change the display name if you change your mind. So once you have supplied this information, you click the Create button at the bottom. And then your next step is to export the module template. And I'm going to go ahead and give you a quick view of what that looks like. So if you go to, you can either follow the link, click the hyperlink right there, or you can go to hydrolearn.org in modules, and you'll see something called the Hydrolearn module template. This is your guide in formatting and inserting all of the information that you're going to need for a complete module. To export it, you click this button right here. It'll process the request. It may take a moment or so. You hit this export button. It takes a moment to combine everything, and then you can download your exported course. This creates a zip file that you will be able to import in the next step. And I apologize for my slow internet connection. So here, once you get here to the download, you'll click this blue button, and then it will, of course, download the zip file. Remember where you download that zip file, because you're going to have to navigate back to that in order to import a module. So to import your module, you go into your shell module, the empty one you just created, and you'll click Tools and Import. Like I said, you're going to have to click Choose the file to import, and then navigate to that zip file and replace your course with that file. It's very important to remember that when you import a module, it will overwrite everything in the module that it's going into. So always make sure that you are importing a module into an empty one, or you will lose all of your progress. Like it says here, replace my course with the selected file. It will replace it, and it cannot be undone. So make sure you are very committed to importing this new module.
Jenny, is there a way to protect the module in case, like, since we are working in partners, all of a sudden somebody makes a mistake and imports the module? Is there a backup, in other words, to be able to go back to it?
Unfortunately, no, there isn't a backup, but there are different practices you can use to make sure that you're not messing up your main module. So you all have a practice course that in theory you've gone through. It's sitting in your studio. You can always import something into that one. And in that way, you're sure not to mess up your main module that you're going to be using for your students. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. But I was thinking like a module in progress while 2 or 3 people are working on adding content to it at the same time. Mm-hmm. And somehow somebody does not make a mistake and override everything.
The only way that you could overwrite everything is with an import. So if you keep that in mind, you should be fine. But you can always have sort of like a sandbox area to work in too, if you want to make sure that you're not making mistakes to your final product. Yeah, I think that's the best that we could do for now. And another thing to note is that with your settings in Studio, you cannot delete a module. So you don't have to worry about undoing all of your work. If you want to delete a module, and we can talk about this more later, but the best you can do is archive. So you don't have to worry about deleting everything. We have more.
Just to follow up, Denny. So is there a backup? Like, does Hydrolearn do the backups for this?
No, we don't have backups.
Okay, because I would never normally do anything that didn't have a backup. So we should probably keep backups nightly or something on our own computers to just to export the module.
I mean, that's certainly a good practice. If you would like to keep your own backups, you could export your own module and then just keep it in an organized way on your own computer. That's certainly a workaround.
Okay.
But since that seems to be a popular request, I'll make a note of it and see what our developers say. Maybe if we have that functionality available or something we can create.
And I would comment that much like your backup of your LMS, your Canvas or your Moodle or Blackboard is not something that you typically back up as you're creating it because it's on the server. And so, so long as somebody doesn't come in and import a whole other course, which is a lot of steps, you can't overwrite the whole thing.
Thanks, Melissa. Do you have any more questions about importing before I move forward? So the next step that you need to do is to hide the course. I apparently forgot to do animation. Let me move this out of the way. So the next step is to hide your module while it's under construction. And this is also something that you're all familiar with since everyone successfully hid their practice module. This isn't intuitive, but it is easy to do. All you have to do is in Studio, you click on Settings, and then Schedule and Details, and then Course Schedule. And this is what the course schedule looks like on that page. You need to set your course start date and your enrollment end date to be the same day in the past. And then once you enter these dates, you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there's a little pop-up. It's like a little warning message to save your changes. So make sure that you save your changes when you make these changes. The next step is to add team members to your module. So from your module that you just imported this into, you'll click on Settings and then Course Team. You can add your teammates so that they can edit the module as well. So up to this point, we've had one person who is totally in charge of the module, and now you're going to add your either your partner or your trios, and then also add your assigned content, education, and technical guides. And if you've forgotten who that is, you can reference that assigned points of contact spreadsheet. But an important difference to note here is that when you're adding your team members, you have to supply their studio email. So don't use the emails that are in the assigned contact sheet because it may not be the same as the emails that we use in our studio. For example, y'all always email me at Gmail, but I have a different studio email. So when you go to add your content and technical and education guides, make sure that you're pulling from this list of emails. Otherwise, it may say something like that person doesn't exist in Studio when really we're there. We just have a different email. Does anyone have questions about team members? And this is the part where you can begin to really customize your module. So using your module outline template, that Google document you were working from, you should be able to add your sections into the module. So in the template that we provided, let me look at my course outline and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Once you import this module template, you will see something very similar to this. And when you're adding your sections, we recommend that you duplicate your sections so you can always have them as a template available for you when you need to add more later, right? In order to duplicate, you click the button that looks like two pieces of copy paper. right, making a copy. And now you'll be able to modify this as you see fit to suit your needs. In order to add your overall learning objectives, it's in the first section called Introduction. Within that section, you have one subsection called Module Overview. And then one of the units is called the Overall Learning Objectives. So navigate here to this section, this subsection, Module Overview. And here in this Overall Learning Objectives unit is where you'll be able to modify that table to add the learning objectives that you and your partner have been brainstorming so far. Right in here, we've provided a template for you to fill out. And this looks very similar to the examples that you saw earlier today. And if you need to reference those, they were back on slide 36. So your task from now until we meet again is to build your module outline and to populate your learning objectives table. Since there's a significant amount of time between now and then, you don't have to start working then. You can also start adding your overall summary, module summary in that first section. And if you think you're ready, you can start adding your summary of your sections as well. And when you're ready, email the link for your module to your guides, so that way we can check the work that you've done. Does anybody have any questions for me before we send you into your partner groups?
Hi, Jenny, this is Ren. I just got an email. Somebody doesn't have the developer access on Studio. So I was just wondering if, are there anybody on this group don't have Studio developer access or course creator access? And who can help, you know?
I can help with that. I can help with that. This is Imad. So who has this problem?
I'm the one who emailed Ren. I requested it on Friday.
Okay,
And it says
I'm
it's
sorry
pending.
I did not see your request, but
That's fine.
I'll approve it right away.
Thanks.
You should be approved now, Eric.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great, so I'll go ahead and open up the breakout rooms. If you have questions, you can stay here and ask Jenny those questions. And if you get stuck along the way, call me for help and I will send your, I'll come help you, or I'll send your technical guide to come help you. So just to keep in mind, this is our second session. We're not meeting again as a whole group until the time that's on the slide there, 5, 4, 3, 2.
I see a question in the chat box, Jenny and Melissa. I'm sorry if I interrupted. From Shanping.
Yes, so how we deal with equations in Studio, that is done, it's with LaTeX, right, Jenny?
Yes, it is.
And so there's some, sorry, go ahead.
We're probably going to say the same thing. There's more information about equations in Hydrolearn 101, section 3. And don't feel rushed to add equations right now, because we will go over them in detail on a later date. I can't remember exactly which day.
I think Thursday or Friday this week. We're going to talk more about that side of things.
Yeah, sure. So if you are particularly motivated, go right ahead. I'm not going to stop you. And if you need extra help, I'm here.
And as Jenny said, I know not everyone got to finish their outlines and learning objectives, so you can also use this time to start your module, to work on your outlines, to work on your learning objectives. This is meant to be productive time for everyone. All right, I'll send it to
I see a question from Adam.
Sure.
Is he still in the room?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Hi, Adam. Okay, so you can change the course display name by going to Advanced Settings, our Settings, Advanced Settings, and you can change the display name. I'll share my screen and show you real quick. So Settings, Advanced Settings, sorry, I'm having an issue. I'll be sure to add a slide to the bonus folder to make sure everyone can see this. Because apparently my internet's going to be very slow. Should be right here, course display name. Yep, just change everything right here in between the quotation marks.
All right, so we still have some fellows in the main room. Do we have other questions we want Jenny's help with? So Jenny's going to lead us into the next section, while I rearrange the breakout rooms. Jenny, I think those people have come back, so go for it.
Okay. So you made it. It's the final session of the day. Congratulations. So what we're going to do is we're going to put you into your content groups. And what we mean by that is that you're going to be in the medium-sized group. So other people who have the same content guide as you. So you'll have a bit of a larger group. And in these groups, we ask that you share your module outline that you have done today. And when you do this, you may find you have some similarities or maybe some resources you can share, or you can problem solve together, things like that. So we have a few guidelines here of things you could potentially discuss with one another. So for instance, you can discuss the topics, you know, if it's targeted at the correct audience, is it the right level of difficulty? Make sure that your outlines include like the overall introduction section, and then the overall learning objectives. And if you have created your sections in Hydrolearn, make sure that each section begins with the summary of the content that's going to be presented in that section, and then as well as listing the learning objectives that correspond to that section. You want to make sure that your sections are clearly identified so that students will be able to at a glance tell what's within that section. So is it going, or subsection, like is it a learning activity? Is it a check your understanding, or am I being presented with new information? And furthermore, you can sort of look at each other's learning objectives and maybe provide some refinement or some insight. Make sure that they're representing different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Like Dr. Habib mentioned in one group earlier, they don't all need to be level 5 and 6, right? Because we have to have levels 1 through 3 to build up to levels 4, 5, and 6. So you want to make sure you have a fine spread of the Bloom's taxonomy levels. You want to make sure you're using measurable verbs. I've learned from Melissa that understand is a dirty word. How can you really quantify how someone understands something? So you need to have descriptive words there. And again, make sure that your learning objectives are listed at the beginning of the module, and then again at the top of every section. And after your content groups, you will not be coming back into one large room. So whenever you're done with your discussions, you can just sign off. And you do have homework, and I get to assign it. So by tomorrow morning, we would like you to make any required revisions either to your Hydrolearn module or to your module outline document. So any type of feedback you receive today, you know, sleep on it, think about it, and make the revisions as necessary. So Melissa, are you ready to send them off?
I am ready to send them off. I will open your rooms.